Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herbert Ricardo with Alicia Vassar and Rich Grego. And hopefully some of you have already are accustomed to our weekly show. And what we'd like to do is talk a little bit about mindfulness today. And it's a term that keeps coming up in the social media environment. There have been a number of books written about it, and it's age old. There's these philosophers out there that talk about, the unexamined life is not worth living, and I believe that was Socrates, and and I know that Rich is going to set me straight on this one. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we create an environment where we're able to be mindful of our of our current moment, right? That's a lot of what mindfulness is. In this world, in this time frame where we've got so many characteristics, social media, family, friends, work, other obligations that are pulling us away. And let's see if there's a way that in the next 35, 40 minutes, we can put together something relevant and minimally cohesive that everybody might be able to enjoy. So maybe I'll go ahead and start with Alicia. Alicia, tell us a little bit about what does mindfulness look like to you, and do you have any barriers to it?
So one of the first things that I thought when you brought up barriers to mindfulness was definitely my phone, because through this exercise of kind of thinking about, okay, what does prevent me from being mindful, like being present, because it does feel like it's go, go, go. And one of those things is definitely my phone, because it's very easy to just disengage from the moment and just go to scrolling. Or for me, a lot of times it's built into my routines. So I'll be listening to a video. That video will be the video that I'm watching during my lunch. I'll have that video going when I'm washing the dishes, brushing my teeth. There are times, and my mom has done it as well, so it must be like a family kind of thing. But she'll be like, I'll stop and I'll be like, I can't complete this task until I found the right video for it. And then she realized like how insane that is. She's just trying to take a bath. She can enjoy the pleasant, nice, warm bath. And my mom's someone who she makes her bathroom like a little spa. So she really can enjoy that environment. But even for her, it's very easy to get caught up in just the video. I wonder if you guys deal with this as well, because you guys do come from that older generation, so you've had the experience of not constantly having a phone available to you, something to distract you.
Yeah. Isn't it, Herb? Isn't it interesting? At least to me, that since you just said this, we were talking, Alicia and I were, talking, bantering about this before. And I was, telling her what a basket case I am. And I was just thinking, isn't it amazing how quickly you forget? I remember I was riding around in my former life. I was an investigator. Herb knows all this stuff. And I was riding around with somebody doing surveillance or something. And they got a call from somebody else and they needed to give them directions and sort of multitask when we were doing what we were doing. And he turned around. He was older than me, actually. And he turned around and he said, can you ever remember what it was like to him? How did we ever get along without these things? He holds up his phone and he said that. And I was just thinking, Herb, do you remember? It's so easy to forget. When we were living, we lived these, technology, not technology free, but pretty pristine lives in terms of that when we were younger. And I don't even really, it doesn't seem that different. It was almost like the transition was so seamless that I don't remember what it was like before having cell phones. You know,
You
I don't
know,
know.
um, and I know one of our in one of our podcasts, we're going to talk about how our bodies change over time. And, before we were driving, we weren't driving. We didn't drive, right? And so we might say to ourselves, well, what was our lives like when we weren't driving? People took us around and everything else, or we walked or we used our bicycles.
Yeah.
Um, And, what was it like before we didn't work, right? And that seems so long ago, of course. But I think talking with Alisha and what you're having to say, there's no doubt that I think I'm more aware of how often I'm picking up my phone. I'm more aware, and maybe I am because I talk to my students about it. Maybe it's because I we have this environment where we're always trying to see whether or not we can make our lives richer, and sometimes not always by having that device by us makes our lives richer. So the point is yes, I do try to think back of what it was like, and to what Alicia had mentioned, and that is playing a video, listening to a podcast, listening to music, always having the device next to me and listening to something or watching something. There's no doubt that when that device is not with me, time is much slower, right? The brain has now so conditioned to for lack of a better word, multitasking, taking multiple tasks and going through them, that when it only has one task to do. So imagine you're just washing the dishes without listening to a podcast. Doing the dishes takes longer. So you are more mindful of doing the dishes. If you're washing your car, you're more mindful versus if I'm listening to music or I'm listening to something else, I might miss a spot on the car because my thought process is moving towards listening to that music or listening to that person speaking, whatever it might be.
And
So
yet, oh, sorry. No, go
yeah,
ahead.
so
I'm sorry.
so the point though is so in my quest to be more mindful, I'm going to say to myself, let me remove that, and it'll give me 10 more minutes of being in the moment of whatever activity I'm doing.
I was just going to say, because that was a great example you brought up about listening to music while you do something. And again, been empirical research done on this kind of thing. There have been, and everybody knows, right? There are certain tasks people do that music helps them focus on more attentively, interestingly, right? And I'm almost wondering if in some ways, um, um, it's very possible to multitask or use the internet mindfully, right? I mean, I guess it depends, right? We're sort of in preliminary stages. We're trying to define mindfulness, and I suppose there's some aspects of it, as you point out, that I mean, if you define, again, and thinking about the philosophical and psychological traditions I have in mind, and there are many of them right across cultures, mindfulness entails um, presence where you are. It entails presence in the moment that you're in. And it entails a kind of silence, stillness within the mind so that you can attend to what's there. And that requires that's the hardest part of it, I think. Keeping your mind, anybody who's ever tried to meditate for just 5 minutes
Correct.
runs into that right away, right? And I suppose that, right, there are a lot of ways in which, as you point out, Herb, multitasking, for instance, does not enable you to do that, right? By its very nature. On the other hand, as I said, I know there's when people do surgery, for God's sake, right? You hear about surgeons every time I haven't had too many surgeries done, and they've only been minor, but every time I was wheeled in there, the surgeons had their particular kind of music they liked to play while they were doing surgery. So I guess, in some sense, I guess there are ways in which multitasking can actually make you more mindful. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's interesting. I first wanted to define my kind of idea of mindfulness
Yeah.
because I did really latch on to what you said about the quietness of your mind. Because for
Mm,
me, I'm a very internal person.
mm,
So my mind will be going a mile a minute, even if I'm quiet myself. And I find when I'm not in that like grounded state of just being present and like I'm able to just engage in what I'm doing and
yeah.
not be thinking 50 million steps ahead.
Mm.
because I'm
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
managing, I'm doing all of these different things. I'm thinking of what tasks to do. And when I'm engaging, and I think it's the type of multitasking, because I think you got something really important there, is
Mm.
listening to music can be very useful for a lot of things. And just like I find these videos very useful for tasks I don't want to do. Like uh,
Mm. Mm.
when you were talking, Dr. Ricardo, about being present and like washing dishes and stuff, that would probably be a nightmare for me. It's a sensory nightmare experience. I would be as disengaged as I can.
Yeah.
So for getting me to do a task that originally I was not going to want to do, it's a good motivation to be like, oh, this new video came out. This is something that interests me. This is something that I'm engaged in. I'll pop that onto basically like my little bar and the sink's in front of me and I'll go washing away. Um, but the problem is it doesn't just stay with that. I think I get
Mm.
used to it, and it seems like a lot of people get used to this multitasking where
Mm.
they do it for all things. And I think that's where you get issues like we were saying, it's you can't multitask and connect with people. You can't multitask and genuinely have a
Mm.
conversation and uh it just feels like there's a barrier there when you're doing that multitasking.
And I won't belabor this, but even when I think because that you make a really good point, and it just made me start to really introspect. Even when, say, you're listening to YouTube while you do the dishes, and I all the time, every day when I work out, as Herb probably knows, I listen to lectures while I do. I get caught up on the latest research I want to keep up with and stuff. But are we doing that? It's a question. Are we using those additions or whatever you want to call it to what we're doing, the music or the videos or whatever, to distract us from the task at hand, which I think is what Herb was trying to get at? Or are
Mhm.
we, or does it really help us be mindful of what we're doing and pay attention, or is it an actual distraction from something that we don't like me working out or you doing the dishes? And in which case, maybe it isn't a mindfulness exercise, is it? I don't know.
Yeah. So, we're talking about tasks and
Yeah.
daily tasks. So, doing the dishes, it doesn't matter whether I don't think it does, whether or not you're listening to music or a podcast or watching YouTube while you're doing dishes, or even
Yeah.
sometimes washing the car, depending on how detailed you want to be about washing your particular car. But even
Yeah.
listening to music doing that is fine. When we talk about mindfulness, I think that most of us look at it and say, I'm not so much concerned about the tasks. I'm more concerned about being in the moment for the person I'm with, my friends, my family. I want to be in that moment. The other thing, too, is I want time for self reflection. And and you make a good point, Rich, in the sense of when people try to do yoga and try to remove all kinds of different um, uh, activities that they're trying to think about in their mind. They're trying to create this a blank. We find that that's very difficult to do because the mind is always seeking something to think about. And so to try to stop it from thinking about almost anything is a difficult task. And I think, also when we think about being mindful and mindfulness is if we're reading something. Again, I think I find that a lot too. I'm reading, and then suddenly my mind starts to wander. And I'm like, why am I doing this? I want to just focus on what I'm reading right now. I'm reading this book, I'm reading this paper, whatever I'm reading. I want to be in the moment and do it. But it's almost like my mind is wandering, but it's not telling me where it's going, right? And so
Yeah.
so the point is stop that, right?
Yeah.
And what we have to do is almost like everything else that we do in life is we have to condition ourselves to do that. We have to slow it down and say, okay, I'm going to take a few minutes and not be with my phone. I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm just going to go ahead and focus on this book and read. I'm going to find myself a peaceful environment, whatever it might be. And I think that that's sometimes difficult because having to find that 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of time when we feel that, okay, you know what, I actually have that time. Um, this is what we want to do with it, right? And so that's what I'm thinking about when we're talking about mindfulness, in the sense of uh, trying to remove uh, other distractions so that we're in the present moment and we're focusing on exactly what we want to be focusing on that moment.
Excellent. Yeah.
I was going to add one of the things that because this kind of had me reflect on the fact of like, what is my relationship with my phone and how do I want to make a way of allowing myself to be more mindful? Because when I was speaking with my mom about this topic, I was talking about how I find it really useful that I can do this type of multitasking and I can get things done. However, there's a time and place for it. I have to learn, use it when it's necessary, but that's not how you can engage at all times because you're going to burn yourself out. Um, One of the things I was thinking of doing is I find myself being more mindful a lot when I forget my phone. Say I'm going on a walk with my dog and I just end up leaving my phone at the house instead of taking it with me because normally I'll listen to a video while I'm walking him. Or yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing. Listening to a video. Very rarely I'll be talking to someone, but I'm not present. I'm not in there in the moment. I'm not enjoying the walk because there's a lot of things that you can enjoy. Besides, there's also that connection with my dog that I'm supposed to be building. So I found just leaving the phone, which I know it's not possible for a lot of people in a world where we're always connected. But I've seen for my mother, she has like her routine in the morning. She leaves her phone when she wakes up because a lot of people, the first thing that they look at in the morning, for me too, is my phone. She leaves it in her room and then she goes, makes her coffee, feeds the dogs, goes outside, sits on our porch, and she just watches the sunrise and stuff. So she's already starting the day, which I think is another kind of really good thing, not like finding that time for that mindfulness.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good that's a I don't know, I think that's a good point and a good idea. And again, I think that goal, with anyway, with most philosophical traditions is to, cultivate a state of mindfulness always 24 hours a day, no matter what you do, right? And that's what the traditional practices. I mean, that's why when and again, there's been empirical research done on this. They had people stay away from their phones for a week and share their experiences. And again, invariably, they all say they become usually much more attentive to the present moment, which is what mindfulness is all about. So that I think you're right. There's probably you know, limits to what you can still do if you're trying to multitask at all, let alone be on a phone or not. But I think the idea, again, in most traditions, if you go away to a wellness retreat, usually they make you give up your phone, right? If you go to a rehab, I've never done that, but I know that's another thing they usually make you do. If you certainly go to a monastery of any kind from any tradition, that's definitely what that's definitely what they're going to have you do. And the idea is that you do being attentive to where you are means multitasking is just not a good thing. In general, multitasking is not a good thing, even when you're doing just things by yourself, and even when you're not trying to pay attention to other people or anything. That's why the Zen Buddhists have you do tea ceremonies and archery and Tai, in the Taoist tradition, there's Tai Chi, and then in the Hindu tradition, there's yoga and all that kind of stuff. That's just the whole idea is so that when you're paying attention to whatever it is, whatever you're doing, what you're doing, be totally present in that moment, in that space, doing what you're doing. So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I just think that's a good idea.
Rich, and so in in the unexamined life is not worth living means that we should be examining our life regularly. So, in other words, and that's part of being mindful because now what you're doing, it's almost like if you have a child, right? You're
Yeah,
watching that child, you're being mindful that the child is making the decisions that you want the child to be making, the child is behaving the way that you want to. Well, isn't it the same way with yourself? And so, if you're practicing this fairly regularly, and I'm not saying you necessarily have to be you don't have to be examining yourself every day, but if you on a weekly, monthly basis say, am I accomplishing the things that I want to accomplish? And they don't have to be, again, earning degrees or getting certain jobs. They are, am I spending time with my family? Am I spending time with my friends? Am I giving the good quality time so that when I'm with them, I'm with them. I'm not just spending a 2 hour time or a 1 hour time or 15 minutes with them
yeah,
just to say that I've given them that time, but I've given them the time and the attention. And have I given
yeah,
myself the
yeah,
time and attention,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is this what the philosophers want us to do?
Well, some of them, right? But and I think, you say the unexamined life is not worth living is a pretty universally, Socrates said it. I think, that's what philosophy is all about. But of course, there's different ways of examining your life, and I think the idea of the examined life as taking a lot of tests and doing a lot of abstract contemplation about who you are tends to draw you away, maybe from, believe it or not, from mindfulness, in the sense I think that many of the psychological philosophical traditions think of it as being, because the kind of self-examination you're doing when you're doing quiet meditation, true meditation, and not meditation as in thinking about yourself, psychoanalyzing yourself, but clearing your mind and being present. That kind of examined life is, I think, definitely where mindfulness becomes crucial. And that's why when I was talking to Alicia, I was saying I feel so often the more time I spend on the computer or doing whatever I'm doing, almost, I just feel like it's taking me away from a deeper dimension of living my life so often. And maybe that's because, and you guys can both speak to this, especially maybe Alicia, since you guys you live in a more media dominated age, and you grew up that way much more than Herb and I, but it seems as though so many of these of the things that we've designed, media and everything else, computers, phones, everything that allows you to explore all these different sort of dimensions and multitask, is really designed to distract you, isn't it? And a lot of our social institutions have a real stake in people staying distracted all the time, right? Advertisers want you to do that. Places, things that want to sell you stuff, right? For entertainment, want you to remain in that unmindful state all the time, because that's what keeps you distracted and endlessly searching for more stimulation and perpetually. I mean, at least maybe you think I'm wrong, but it just seems that way to me anyway.
So this goes back to that article I was talking about. I was reading a Business Insider article. It's on
Hmm.
America's phone-obsessed teens are always multitasking.
Hmm.
And it was talking about how it's causing issues. And one of the things that it brought up was there's a self-awareness. Like they were doing polls of like 13, 17-year-olds, very young Gen Z, so even younger than me. And they're very self-aware of how uh, social media and these phones are hindering them, but they
Hmm.
would come back and back again to where it felt like you're missing out. Like it talked about even the teens or Gen Z that tended to stay away from these things, they weren't able to engage with their peers in the same way because that's how we engage. I know for me, engaging over funny memes or internet
Hmm.
culture,
Hmm.
those are very large ways that we connect for the younger generation. So a lot of times it feels like we have a vested interest in continuing to consume in this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think, Herb?
Well, yeah, there's no doubt, and I think you can use technology. I believe you can use the phone for even for mindfulness because a couple times a week I look at some kind of cartoons, funny pictures,
Mm.
and I look at that picture and I think of one of my friends that might enjoy it, and so I'll send it to them, and they'll have a chuckle, and they'll send it back and say, "Hey, pretty cool little."
Mm.
So, so you were mindful of, I'm seeking some of these pictures, some of these cartoons to send out to my friends. You know, I want to kind of
Mhm.
create a happier environment for them if I can. So there's that. The other thing too is um, I know how I'm feeling, and if I'm feeling a certain way, I can use my phone to accentuate. You know, if I'm feeling pretty good, I'll put on some more music, or if I'm not feeling so good, I will put on music to make me feel good. So I'm not going to say that technology. Um, will remove you from being mindful because you can use it for mindfulness, but kind of
Mm.
going back to what you were saying, Rich, and that is that's right. There are two different types. There's that mindful in the present, removing all stimuli from you, or stimuli that is external,
Yeah.
so that your internal stimuli, which is your mind and the way that you think, you try to create a more blank space. And it's in that blank space that you find a sense of peace. And I would imagine that there's a lot of people who either want to feel that way, and there's a lot of people who don't want to feel that way. They're like, I don't want that space. I don't need that space. I'm totally happy with all this
Mm.
activity going
Yeah.
on. And then there's people who saying there's too much activity going on.
Mm.
I want some space.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
So then suddenly mindfulness lives within you.
Mm.
So in other words, what is mindful for you? And I think if you're spending time at work and you're listening to your boss and your mind is wandering about something else and you haven't really given the attention, and the same thing at home, you've got your son, your daughter, your wife, your spouse, and you're spending time, they're speaking, and you're saying that you're listening, and then what happens is
Mm.
an hour later you say, gosh, I wish I had given them more of that time. So I think with mindfulness is how do we create a way so that when we're in front of somebody or when we're doing a particular task, that we can remove the other externalities that might be coming in and influencing us, and how do we keep them at bay so that we're only in that particular moment. And I think as much as we can do that, that's where we want to be with our level of mindfulness.
I agree. You guys think you've achieved that? Have attained that?
I'm still
Yeah.
working on it. I'm still working on it. I doing this has been a really good reflection on my relationship with my phone. And uh like you were saying, Dr. Ricardo, about like some people it may be for them it's easier to just keep going, and that's how they process, that's how they work, and that uh, this idea of mindfulness doesn't seem as useful for them. But at least in my case, I know, yes, that momentum is really good for me getting a lot of tasks and things done. But like I said, it's not sustainable. Um, Plus, having those reflections, you're able to take time to realize, like I realized how much more I've been using my phone in ways that I can disengage from it, because it's really hard to find time to just reflect on yourself in what you're doing. Because a lot of times it's easy to reflect on yourself and like make value judgments and things like that. But it's harder to reflect more in depth on what you're doing, the things around you, your environment, the much larger picture than just your singular self.
In answering your question, Rich, you know what? I spent a lot of time working on this, and I have for years. I try to be and especially probably because I teach, and when I'm in the classroom, I want to take all my other distractions away, and I really want to spend that time with my students, and I want that to be a conversation. So I do it in my in my vocation, in my craft. I try to do it. I try to do it with my family. I try to let them know that I don't have other factors that are influencing my thoughts right now. That I and I have to qualify it because I think it's so easy for everyone to believe that you have some, because people will say to me, "Oh, you're really busy. You're a busy person," and and yes, I am busy. There's no doubt about that. But I don't want to feel that I'm too busy for you, whoever that is, whether it's a student, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member. I don't want that. And so I need to project that, no, look, I'm going to show you that I'm in the moment for you. I'm in the present. What was really interesting, strangely enough, I'm feeling a little tired because last night I was watching a YouTube a crime show, and it was a real a situation where a child had killed another child, and the child is is being interrogated by police officers, and the police officers step out, and the mother comes in, and the mother is interacting with the son and saying, "Son, now you need to tell us, you need to tell me." And while she's got her son, who I'm not sure how old he is, 14, 15 years old, she's on her cell phone. You
Wow.
can see the camera's on that
Wow.
while she's pressing buttons. Now, again, I don't know who she's contacting.
Yeah,
Maybe
it
she's
might have been
contacting
a lawyer.
a
Yeah.
lawyer,
Yeah.
her husband, whomever it might be. But, and so I couldn't sleep last night because I was thinking, my goodness, here is, if any time you need to just be with your
Mhm.
son, be with
Yeah.
that person whom, because he was asking what's going to happen to me, and she was saying, I don't know. My gosh,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but because of the way that we are, as you just said, maybe she's trying to get a hold of a lawyer, maybe she's trying to get a hold of her
Yeah.
husband, or a myriad of different things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but the point is there's no doubt, because she was doing something on the phone and her son was grabbing a hold of her and saying, what's going to happen to me? She clearly could not have given him all the attention at that particular moment that I thought. Now, again, you know what? I'm watching something on YouTube. Who am I to pass judgment on something? But I just did. And so my
Stand
point
on
though is,
business.
well, but again, I think that to me,
Yeah.
I think there are situations like this that happen. Where we're speaking to someone, right? And we're punching, we're talking to somebody on the phone, or so we are distracted, right? And
Yeah.
so mindfulness to me is, how do you remove yourself from distractions and always be in the moment that you want to be in at that time, being present.
Good point.
Love it.
There was
Um,
anything I wanted to ever tell my younger self, it would be, honestly, the things I regret, and I have so many of them from my life with the people that I have loved, friends, family who are gone now forever, and I can never reclaim these moments, are not so much things that I did, although there were plenty of those too, but not so much those, but the million times that we were just driving down the street. I think when I am driving down the street with my mother or father, who are now gone now. And I'll think back on that on a time when we were just driving down the street and I was looking out the window thinking about a million things that were going on that day. And I think, my God, I had my mother and my father there for 10 minutes. I would do anything to have 10 minutes with them now, anything, right? And I just let that slip by because I was thinking about something that's of absolutely no consequence. And it probably wasn't of any consequence to me 10 minutes after I was thinking about it. And I traded those sacred moments I squandered them on those distractions. So, I mean, I think if there's one illustration of how vital mindfulness is, at least for me, those moments are that. And if there's one thing I had to if I could tell my younger self something, it would be mindful instead of distracted.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And but that's also life, isn't it? That's the
Yeah.
point. The point though is, we live in a world where you can't turn off if you have a job and
Yeah.
whatever that particular job is, you leave the job and you go home and you're with family or you go and you're hanging out with friends. It's hard to believe that you are not going to think about, oh my gosh, I should have that file that I should have at least finished
Yeah.
that off before I
Yeah.
left,
Yeah.
and contacted that person. Of course, that's going to happen. The point though is how much can we, when we're there at work, and just exactly what you just said, Rich, that when you are with your parents and say, you know what, at one point, I'm not going to be with my parents, meaning, in 20 minutes, I'm not going to be with them.
Yeah.
Mind, let's think about that later. Whatever it happens to be. And again, I think that's a level of conditioning. It's a level of training yourself. And I think it's a really good point for you to say, this is what I would tell my younger self, because I
Yeah.
think younger people, um, don't have that level of maturity, and they don't have the life experience to know about how mindfulness can help you and being in that moment versus thinking about 10,000 different things.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a criticism, it's just the way we are designed. And
Yeah.
so I like what you've just said in the sense of, how can we share this with younger people and anybody else, obviously, who wants to be able to be closer to the moment. Alicia.
I just agree a lot. Like, I think it's very hard to remind yourself that at some point, especially because you take it for granted, like you said, Rich, for your younger self, you don't take the time to realize. Like, I think about the fact that that very simple thing that you explained,
Mhm.
just being in the car driving somewhere, and for me, my parents would always, like my mom, we would drive everywhere, so constantly just this idea that
Mhm.
there's those times, a lot of times I'll be off somewhere else thinking about, because it's just driving, it's the now.
Yep. Yeah.
But it's the moments that I engage deeply. We've had conversations and stuff where those are the moments that I will remember for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I can honestly say that this exercise of having the podcast, when we create a particular topic or subject that we're going to talk about, and all three of us, do a little bit of research. We're introspective about what we believe about the particular subject. We also might look at some other information, and I can't speak for both of you, but I kind of sense it that when I'm here with the two of you, I am absolutely here with the two of you. I am not thinking about anything else. And I can honestly say that I look forward to it. I look forward to this, whether we have 35, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be. And I think that we should be doing more of this with our friends and family. We know that we're going to see them in 2 days, or we know we're going to see them in a couple of hours. Let's prepare for that moment that we're going to be with them, and as we're able to prepare, it'll train our mind to say, I'm exactly where I want to be, versus I'm here but also I'm thinking about these other things. And so I believe that we truly can create that moment and that presence for ourselves.
excellent point. Again, one more, hope I'm not, possibly verging on the morbid examples, but it's not morbid. But I don't mean to depress everybody. But I recently, my wife lost her mother, who we were very close to. We were taking care of her for many years because she was very infirm, and it got to the point where you kind of knew gradually, slowly, she was in her last days eventually, and she was sort of housebound, and we'd go over there. We'd have to go over there many, many times during the day to do things and take care of her. And very often it was kind of, you would go over there and do routine stuff. Kind of like you're saying, Alisha, you sort of take it for granted, and it's kind of a chore. And she'd have her TV on, and I got, I kind of became aware. And this is one of the few ways that we become, life forces us to become painfully aware of time and mortality. And I started becoming aware, well, I'm taking these moments for granted. We're not going to have many, many more of them. And we all just tended to, she'd have the TV running a lot, because just to keep her mind, she'd had nothing else to do but sit there and try to distract herself. And I consciously, as you said, Herb, so this is a good illustration, I think, of what you're talking about. I started thinking, well, what can I go over there to do to get her feeling engaged again, instead of just zoning out in front of the TV and because she was tremendously depressed, as you can imagine, during these times as well. So, I was thinking, here's a person with this huge, amazing history, because I hear stories about when she was young and stuff. So I said, why don't you start writing your stuff down, writing down your memories? And she loved drawing. I said, illustrate them. She'd write poetry and all kinds of things like that. And I said, please do that for me. And then when I come over, I'll read it. We can talk about it. It'd be really cool. And I'll save this. So we can send this to family members and things like that. And she did it. And now we have that. We have those memories of her life that I never would have known about if she hadn't shared it, which are rich and incredible. And they're written down, and I can give those to her great grandchildren. And she has illustrations. She drew pictures of places she lived and things like that. And I think, again, not to belabor this, but I think that's a good illustration of what you're talking about, Herb. That enriched experience and focused everybody on a mindful engagement of the moment they were in together and sharing experiences together. That if we had just relied on the technologies we have around us to just distract us from each other and from the moment, we wouldn't have done. So I don't know if that helps. If that's a good
it's great. It's a great. No, it's a great story, and I actually had the pleasure of knowing Lolita, and what a wonderful lady she was. So I'm glad I had the opportunity, and I can still remember my conversations with her. Mm-hmm. So that was great. Alisha, anything that you want to?
I hope everyone like me takes from this conversation to be a lot more mindful, especially with the people they love in their life, because it is really, I can imagine that made a massive difference at the end of her life, being able to relive and relay and connect over her amazing story.
Yeah, thanks. I hope so.
Great. No, absolutely. All right, there you go. And so hopefully if you all enjoyed the three of us talking about some pretty cool mindfulness and some of our other topics, you'll join us again. But we've had a great time. Thank you again, Alisha. Thank you, Rich. And happy Friday. And we'll see you all next week. All right. Take care. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Con Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.